The champagne glass slipped from Natalie's manicured fingers as she stared at the business card I placed gently on her marble kitchen counter. Green Thread Studios, Victoria Hayes, founder and CEO, she read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. You bought out Sterling and Associates? She stammered, her perfectly contoured face draining of color. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Not bought out, I corrected with a serene smile, adjusting the sleeves of my custom-tailored blazer. Acquired their sustainable development division. The irony is that Brandon's department now reports directly to me. I paused, watching the realization dawn in her eyes. Oh, and Natalie? I absolutely love what you've done with this place. My guest cottage has similar finishes. Her jaw dropped as she processed the casual mention of my property size. The woman who had once texted me by mistake, revealing her affair with my husband, now stood speechless in the kitchen of the home she'd fought so hard to obtain. The same woman who had unknowingly handed me the greatest gift of my life through her careless error. 3 years earlier, I was Victoria Hayes, living what I believed was an enviable life in our comfortable Beaverton home. At 38, I had convinced myself that supporting Brandon's meteoric rise in Portland's competitive real estate development scene was my contribution to our shared success. We were partners, I told myself, each playing our designated role in building our future together. Our story had begun 12 years ago at Portland State University, where we'd met in an environmental science class. I was the passionate student, with dreams of revolutionizing sustainable fashion, sketching eco-friendly designs in my notebook margins while professors discussed climate change. Brandon was the ambitious business major who saw opportunity in every conversation, already networking with local developers and city planners during his sophomore year. Your creativity is incredible, Vic, he'd told me during one of our late-night study sessions, his fingers tracing the fashion sketches spread across my dorm room desk. We could build an empire together. You bring the vision, I'll handle the business side. Those words had felt like a promise, a partnership that would honor both our dreams. The early years of our marriage had been filled with possibility. We'd moved into a modest apartment in Southeast Portland, both working entry-level positions while planning our eventual success. I took a job at a local boutique, learning the retail side of fashion while developing my design skills in our spare bedroom-turned-makeshift studio. Brandon started as an assistant at a small development firm, studying the industry's key players and building relationships that would serve him later. Gradually, though, the balance had shifted. As Brandon's career gained momentum, my own aspirations were gently redirected toward supporting his climb. The fashion industry is so unpredictable, Vic, he'd say, reviewing his latest project proposals at our kitchen table. Real estate is stable, growing. Once I establish myself, we'll have the financial security to pursue your design dreams as a hobby. A hobby? The word had stung initially, but I'd convinced myself he was being practical. Someone needed to maintain our home, network with the wives of his business associates, and create the polished domestic backdrop that would enhance his professional image. I became the perfect real estate wife, hosting dinner parties for his colleagues, organizing charity events that boosted his company's profile, and maintaining our home as a showcase of his success. My design skills found outlet in decorating our increasingly upscale homes as Brandon's income grew. I sourced sustainable materials, created custom pieces, and developed what friends called an enviable eye for style. Other wives in our social circle regularly asked for decorating advice, and I found myself doing informal consulting work, helping them create beautiful spaces while my own creative dreams remained dormant. "You're so talented," they'd say, admiring the living room I'd transformed with reclaimed wood furniture and organic textiles. "You should start your own interior design business." But whenever I mentioned these conversations to Brandon, he'd smile indulgently, and remind me how much he needed my support during this crucial phase of his career. The subtle erosion of my identity had been so gradual that I'd barely noticed it happening. My college portfolio had been relegated to storage. My sewing machine gathered dust in the closet. My subscriptions to fashion industry publications had been replaced with home and garden magazines that better suited my role as Brandon's supportive wife. Sterling and Associates had hired Brandon as a project manager 3 years into our marriage, recognizing his talent for reading market trends and identifying profitable development opportunities. The position came with a significant salary increase and access to Portland's most influential real estate networks. We'd celebrated by moving to our current house in Beaverton, a 4-bedroom colonial that Brandon saw as a stepping stone to even greater success. "This is just the beginning, Vic," he'd said as we'd signed the mortgage papers. 5 years from now, we'll be looking at houses in West Hills, maybe even Forest Grove. You'll have all the space you want for whatever projects interest you then. Always then, always someday. My dreams were perpetually postponed while his moved steadily forward. I'd adapted to the rhythm of his ambitions, measuring my days by his schedule and priorities. Morning coffee together before he left for the office, where I'd listen to his plans for the day and offer encouragement. Afternoons spent maintaining our home, running errands, and preparing for whatever social obligation awaited us. Evenings, entertaining clients or attending industry events where I'd smile charmingly and deflect questions about my own career. "Victoria keeps me grounded," Brandon would tell his colleagues, his arm around my waist at company gatherings. "She's the creative one in our relationship, always making our house feel like a home. I couldn't do what I do without her support." The praise felt hollow, though I'd convinced myself it represented appreciation for my sacrifices. I was contributing to our success, just not in the way I'd once imagined. The woman who'd designed sustainable clothing lines in college had become the woman who chose organic cotton throw pillows for the living room. Our social circle consisted entirely of Brandon's business associates and their spouses. I'd developed friendly relationships with other wives, bonding over shared experiences of supporting ambitious husbands. We'd meet for lunch at trendy Pearl District restaurants, discussing home renovations and vacation plans while our husbands networked their way up Portland's real estate hierarchy. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "You're so lucky," my friend Caroline had said over mimosas at our last brunch. "Brandon's trajectory is incredible. Sterling and Associates is talking about making him a partner soon." She'd leaned closer conspiratorially. "My husband heard from Marcus Sterling himself that Brandon's being groomed for senior leadership." The news had filled me with pride, even as a small voice in my head wondered what my own trajectory might have looked like. Brandon had mentioned the partnership possibility, but had been characteristically focused on the business implications rather than celebrating with me. "It means longer hours initially," he'd explained that evening. "More client entertainment, more travel to check potential development sites. I'll need your support more than ever." More support, more sacrifice, more postponement of my own ambitions. I'd thrown myself into being the perfect partner for an aspiring real estate mogul. I'd researched sustainable building practices so I could contribute intelligently to conversations about Brandon's projects. I'd learned about Portland's zoning regulations and development politics. I'd cultivated relationships with the wives of city council members and planning commission officials, understanding that social connections often influenced business decisions. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd become an expert in sustainable development, the very field that aligned with my environmental values, but only as it related to Brandon's career rather than my own interests. I knew more about green building, materials, and energy-efficient design than many professionals in the field. Yet my knowledge served only to make me a more valuable accessory to my husband's ambitions. Our home had become a testament to my sublimated creativity. Every room reflected careful attention to sustainable materials and aesthetic beauty. Friends regularly asked for the sources of my furniture and decor, amazed by my ability to create sophisticated spaces using reclaimed and eco-friendly elements. I'd developed a reputation as someone with impeccable taste and environmental consciousness, traits that enhanced Brandon's professional image among Portland's increasingly environmentally aware elite. Victoria's eye for design is remarkable. Marcus Sterling had told Brandon at a recent company party, gesturing toward the sustainable fashion pieces I'd worn that evening, vintage finds I'd carefully curated and altered to fit perfectly. She should consider starting her own consulting business. There's real demand for environmentally conscious design services. Brandon had smiled appreciatively at the compliment, while subtly steering the conversation back to business topics. Later, driving home, he'd mentioned Marcus's comment casually. Interesting idea about the consulting work. Maybe something to consider once I make partner and we have more financial stability. Once again, my potential was relegated to someday, dependent on Brandon's timeline rather than my own readiness or desire. The pattern had become so entrenched that I'd stopped questioning it. My role was to support, to enhance, to provide the stable foundation that allowed Brandon's ambitions to flourish. I'd convinced myself that this was partnership, that his success was our success, that my sacrifices were investments in our shared future. Looking back, I can see how completely I'd disappeared into Brandon's shadow, how thoroughly I'd accepted the narrative that my dreams were secondary to his career. I'd become an expert at making myself smaller so he could appear larger, dimming my own light so his could shine brighter. The warning signs of trouble had been subtle at first, easily dismissed or rationalized away. Brandon's working hours had gradually extended, with more frequent evening meetings and weekend site visits. His phone, once casually left on kitchen counters or bedside tables, had become a permanent fixture in his hand or pocket. He'd developed new interests in fitness and style, suddenly concerned with his appearance in ways that seemed professional, but felt somehow more personal. I need to look the part for senior leadership, he'd explained when I'd commented on his new workout routine and updated wardrobe. Image matters in real estate, especially when you're competing for major clients and investors. The explanation had made sense. Portland's real estate market was competitive, and Brandon was positioning himself for partnership at Sterling and Associates. Of course, he needed to present himself professionally. Of course, his schedule would become more demanding as his responsibilities increased. I'd supported these changes as I'd supported everything else, taking over more household responsibilities to accommodate his longer hours, encouraging his professional development even when it meant less time together. I'd convinced myself that this was temporary, that once he achieved his partnership goals, we'd find better balance and perhaps finally pursue some of my long-dormant ambitions. The first real warning sign had come at Sterling and Associates' annual summer gala, held at a luxury hotel overlooking the Columbia River. I'd spent weeks preparing for the event, selecting a vintage designer dress that I'd altered to fit perfectly, representing the kind of sustainable fashion choices that aligned with our environmental values while meeting the upscale social expectations of Brandon's industry. The evening had started perfectly. Brandon had been attentive and proud, introducing me to new contacts and praising my insights when conversations touched on sustainable development trends. I'd felt valued, appreciated, genuinely part of his professional world rather than merely an accessory. But as the evening progressed, I'd noticed subtle changes in Brandon's behavior. He'd become distracted during conversations, his eyes scanning the room as if looking for someone specific. He'd checked his phone repeatedly, something he rarely did during important social events. When I'd asked if everything was all right, he'd assured me he was just monitoring some time-sensitive project details. It was during a trip to the ladies' room that I'd first heard her name. Two women from Sterling and Associates were touching up their makeup, unaware of my presence in the adjacent stall. "Have you met the new marketing director yet?" one had asked. "Natalie Kim? She's gorgeous, single, and definitely making an impression." I heard she has some serious connections in the development world, the other had replied. Her father owns Kim Development Group. She's not just beautiful and smart, she's well connected too. Brandon Hayes has been working closely with her on the new Pearl District project, the first woman had continued. Lucky him, getting to collaborate with someone like that. The casual mention of my husband's name in connection with a beautiful, successful woman I'd never heard of had sent an unexpected chill through me. I'd remained in the stall until they'd left, processing the implications of their conversation. When I'd returned to the gala, I'd found Brandon engaged in animated conversation with a striking Asian woman in a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly clothing budget. She was petite, elegant, with the kind of polished confidence that came from growing up with wealth and opportunity. Her laugh was musical, drawing attention from other guests, and she had the easy manner of someone completely comfortable in professional social settings. "Vic, there you are," Brandon had said as I'd approached, his arm slipping around my waist with familiar ease. "I want you to meet Natalie Kim, Sterling's new marketing director. Natalie, this is my wife Victoria." Natalie had extended a perfectly manicured hand, her smile warm and seemingly genuine. "It's wonderful to meet you, Victoria. Brandon talks about you constantly. Your work with sustainable design sounds fascinating." The compliment had been gracious, but something in her eyes had seemed calculating, as if she were assessing potential competition. Or perhaps I'd been reading too much into a perfectly normal professional introduction, influenced by the bathroom conversation I'd overheard. Natalie's been instrumental in developing our marketing strategy for the environmentally conscious development market, Brandon had explained, his enthusiasm evident. She really understands how to position our projects to appeal to Portland's sustainability-focused buyers. I'd engaged in polite conversation, learning that Natalie had recently moved to Portland from San Francisco, where she'd worked for a prominent green development firm. She was clearly intelligent, well-educated, and passionate about sustainable construction practices. Under different circumstances, I might have genuinely liked her, but something about the way Brandon's attention focused completely on her when she spoke, the way he anticipated her needs for drinks or introductions to other guests, had triggered an uncomfortable awareness. This was how he'd once focused on me, back when we were building our relationship and planning our future together. The drive home had been quiet, with Brandon seemingly lost in thought about the evening's business conversations. When I'd asked about Natalie and their collaboration, he'd been enthusiastic in his praise for her professional capabilities while assuring me that their relationship was purely business. "She's brilliant at market analysis," he'd said. "Understands the financial side as well as the environmental benefits. Sterling thinks she could be key to expanding our sustainable development portfolio." The explanation had been reasonable, professional, exactly what I'd expected to hear. Yet something in his tone, perhaps a note of admiration that went beyond mere respect for a colleague's abilities, had planted the first seed of unease. Over the following weeks, Natalie's name had appeared increasingly in Brandon's work conversations. She was developing marketing materials for his projects, attending client meetings as the sustainability expert, and apparently working late into the evening to meet tight deadlines. Brandon's schedule had become even more demanding, with frequent evening work sessions and weekend strategy meetings. "The Pearl District project is our biggest sustainable development yet," he'd explained when I'd commented on his long hours. "Natalie's environmental background is crucial for positioning it correctly with investors and buyers. We can't afford to miss this opportunity." I'd supported his dedication as always, understanding that career advancement required sacrifice and commitment. Sterling and Associates was indeed expanding their green development portfolio, and Brandon was positioning himself as a leader in this growing market. His collaboration with Natalie made perfect business sense, yet I'd found myself paying closer attention to details that might have previously escaped my notice. The way he'd shower and change clothes immediately upon returning home from work. His sudden interest in trying new restaurants and coffee shops. always in service of client, development, or strategy sessions. The careful way he'd position his phone screen away from me when responding to work messages. None of these behaviors had been definitively suspicious. Brandon had always been meticulous about his appearance and eager to explore Portland's dining. Seen for business purposes, his promotion to senior project manager had legitimately increased his client interaction requirements. The late-night work sessions were standard during major project development phases. But the accumulation of small changes had created a persistent undercurrent of uncertainty that I'd tried to dismiss as irrational jealousy or insecurity about his success. The breaking point had come on an ordinary Tuesday morning in late September, exactly 3 years ago from where I stand today in Natalie's kitchen. I'd been organizing Brandon's home office, a monthly task that involved filing project documents and updating his reference materials, when his phone, forgotten on his desk, during his morning shower, had buzzed with an incoming text message. The preview on his lock screen had displayed a message that would change everything. "Last night was incredible, B. Can't wait for our weekend getaway. She still doesn't know anything. N." In that moment, reading those devastating words on my husband's phone screen, my carefully constructed world had begun to crumble. The woman I'd met at the gala, the professional colleague whose intelligence and passion Brandon had praised so enthusiastically, had been sleeping with my husband and planning romantic escapes while discussing my obliviousness to their affair. The text message had been meant for Brandon, but Natalie's careless error in sending it while his phone lay unattended had handed me the truth about my marriage. The perfect mistake that would ultimately prove to be the greatest gift I'd ever received, though I couldn't possibly have known it at the time. Standing in Brandon's office, staring at the evidence of his betrayal illuminated on his phone screen, I'd felt the ground shift beneath my feet. Everything I'd believed about our partnership, our future, our love, had been revealed as elaborate fiction. The supportive wife who'd sacrificed her ambitions for our shared success had been nothing more than a convenient cover story for his affair with a younger, wealthier, more professionally accomplished woman. But in that moment of devastating discovery, something unexpected had stirred beneath the pain and shock. A voice I'd ignored for years, the voice of the ambitious design student who'd once believed she could change the fashion industry, had begun to whisper a single word that would become the foundation of everything that followed. Enough. The phone trembled in my hands as I read the message again, hoping somehow the words would rearrange themselves into something innocent, something explainable. But there it was, stark and undeniable. "Last night was incredible, B. Can't wait for our weekend getaway. She still doesn't know anything. N." I set the phone down carefully on Brandon's desk, my movements deliberate and controlled despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. The familiar sounds of our morning routine continued around me. Brandon's shower running upstairs, the coffee maker gurgling in the kitchen, the neighbor's dog barking in the yard next door. Everything. Normal. Everything exactly as it had been 5 minutes earlier. Yet everything fundamentally changed. I walked to our bedroom window, staring out at the maple tree Brandon had planted for our 5th anniversary. Its leaves were just beginning to turn, edges touched with gold and amber, beautiful in their transformation. How fitting that I would discover my marriage was dying just as summer surrendered to autumn, as things I'd believed permanent revealed their capacity for change. The shower shut off upstairs. Soon Brandon would emerge, towel around his waist, humming the classic rock, songs he favored in the mornings. He would kiss my cheek, comment on the weather, maybe mention his plans for the day. All of it performance now, knowing what I knew. All of it lies wrapped in the comfortable routine of 12 years together. I returned to his office and sat in his leather desk chair, the one I'd helped him pick out when he'd gotten his promotion to senior project manager. We'd gone to 3 different furniture stores, comparing features and prices, finally settling on this one because it projected authority while remaining comfortable for long hours of project planning. I'd been so proud to help him create his professional workspace, so invested in the success it represented. His phone buzzed again. Another message from N. This time, I didn't hesitate to look. Coffee at Stumptown before work? Need to discuss the presentation details for Thursday. Innocent on the surface, the kind of message any colleagues might exchange. But now I understood the subtext, the coded language of an affair hiding in plain sight. How many of their work sessions had been cover for something else? How many times had I encouraged Brandon to stay late at the office, proud of his dedication, while he was actually with her? The water pipes creaked as Brandon finished his shower. I had perhaps 10 minutes before he came downstairs, 10 minutes to decide how to handle this discovery. Confrontation felt impossible in that moment. I needed time to process, to understand the full scope of what was happening, to figure out who I was when I wasn't Brandon's supportive wife. I left his phone exactly where I'd found it and went downstairs to the kitchen, going through the motions of our morning routine with autopilot precision. I poured his coffee, added the splash of cream he preferred, arranged his vitamins in the small dish beside his plate. My hands moved with practiced efficiency while my mind reeled with questions and implications. "Morning, beautiful," Brandon said as he entered the kitchen, straightening his tie with one hand while checking his watch with the other. The casual endearment that had once made me smile now felt like sandpaper against my skin. "Good morning," I managed, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Your coffee's ready." He kissed my cheek, the same quick peck that had marked thousands of mornings, and I caught the scent of his cologne, the expensive one I'd given him for Christmas. Had he started wearing it for her? When had these gestures of affection become hollow performance? "Big day today," he said, scrolling through his phone while sipping his coffee. Was he reading her messages? "Meeting with the Pearl District investors this afternoon, then dinner with the sustainability consultants. Might be late getting home." "Of course," I replied automatically. "The project's really important." "It is," he agreed, his enthusiasm genuine when discussing work. "If we land this deal, it could change everything for us. Sterling's already hinting about fast-tracking my partnership timeline. Us. As if his success was still our shared achievement. As if I was still a partner in his ambitions rather than an obstacle to his affair. The casual inclusion of me in his future plans felt like another betrayal, evidence of how compartmentalized his deception had become. "That's wonderful, Brandon. You've worked so hard for this." He smiled, the expression warm and apparently sincere. This was perhaps the most unsettling aspect of his betrayal. His ability to maintain genuine affection for me while simultaneously planning a future with someone else. How did people manage such cognitive dissonance? How did he reconcile loving me or believing he loved me with betraying me so completely? After he left for work, I sat in our living room, surrounded by the beautiful space we'd created together. Every piece of furniture told a story of our relationship, our shared decisions, our combined aesthetic vision. The reclaimed wood coffee table we'd found at a Milwaukee antique shop during our 3rd year of marriage. The organic cotton sofa we'd saved for months to afford. The art prints from local Portland artists, carefully selected to reflect our environmental values and cultural interests. This room had been featured in Portland Home Magazine 18 months ago, part of an article about sustainable interior design. The photographer had captured our space beautifully, and I'd been proud to share our approach to eco-friendly decorating. Brandon had framed the article, displaying it prominently in his office as evidence of our lifestyle and values. Now, I wondered if Natalie had seen that article, if she'd studied our home through those glossy pages while planning to dismantle it. Did she envision herself in this space, rearranging our carefully curated possessions to suit her own taste? The thought made my stomach clench with possessive fury that surprised me with its intensity. I needed information, understanding, some sense of how long this had been happening and how serious it was. Brandon's laptop sat open on the kitchen counter, where he'd been reviewing project files over breakfast. I'd never snooped through his personal communications before, had never felt the need or desire to violate his privacy. Trust had been the foundation of our relationship, or so I'd believed. His email revealed nothing obviously suspicious. Work communications with Sterling and Associates, project updates, vendor negotiations, all the professional correspondence I'd expected, but buried in his calendar were entries that now took on new meaning. Strategy session with NK appeared repeatedly, often scheduled for evening hours or weekends. Site visit, Pearl District, included only Natalie as attendee. Investor dinner, Sustainable Focus, listed her as co-presenter. The pattern was clear once I knew to look for it. Brandon and Natalie had been working closely together for months, their professional collaboration providing perfect cover for personal involvement. No wonder their affair had escaped my notice. It was hidden within legitimate business activities that I'd actively supported and encouraged. I spent the morning researching Natalie Kim online, driven by a need to understand who this woman was, what she offered that I apparently lacked. Her LinkedIn profile was impressive. Stanford MBA, previous experience with prominent San Francisco development firms, expertise in sustainable construction marketing. Her father's company, Kim Development Group, was a major player in West Coast green building projects. She was beautiful in her professional photos, with the kind of polished confidence that came from a lifetime of privilege and achievement. Her social media presence was carefully curated. Images from upscale Portland restaurants, hiking trips in the Columbia River Gorge, art gallery openings, charity fundraisers. She projected the image of a successful, cultured, environmentally conscious professional who fit seamlessly into Portland's educated elite. Everything I'd once been, or thought I was, before I'd gradually diminished myself to support Brandon's career. Looking at her accomplishments, her confidence, her obvious ambition, I could understand his attraction. She represented everything I'd given up, all the potential I'd set aside to become his supportive partner. The cruelest irony was that I'd once been like her. My college portfolio had shown real promise. My professors had encouraged my entrepreneurial ambitions, my designs had won regional competitions. I'd had my own version of confidence and achievement before I'd convinced myself that supporting Brandon's dreams was more important than pursuing my own. Now I was the obstacle to be hidden from the inconvenient wife who didn't know about their weekend getaways and incredible nights together. I'd become the person they discussed in coded language, the she who remained oblivious while they built something beautiful and exciting in the shadows of my marriage. My phone rang, startling me from my research. Carmen Rodriguez, my closest friend from college, was calling from her office in San Francisco where she worked as a venture capital investor. We'd maintained our friendship despite the distance, talking regularly about life, careers, and relationships. Carmen had always been direct in her opinions, never hesitating to offer honest perspective, even when it was difficult to hear. "Victoria, thank God you answered," she said immediately upon hearing my voice. "I've been thinking about you since our last conversation. Something felt off, and I couldn't shake the feeling that you sounded different." "Different how?" I asked, though I suspected I knew what she meant. "Smaller," she said bluntly, "like you were apologizing for taking up space. It reminded me of how you used to sound when you doubted your design ideas in college, before you learned to trust your instincts." The observation hit too close to home, especially given what I'd discovered that morning. "Things have been complicated lately," I admitted carefully. "Talk to me," Carmen said, her voice gentling. "What's going on? Is it Brandon?" The simple question opened a floodgate I hadn't realized was building. I found myself telling her everything. The text message, the pattern of suspicious behavior, the growing sense that I'd lost myself somewhere in the process of supporting his ambitions. Carmen listened without interruption, occasionally making soft sounds of encouragement or understanding. "Oh, honey," she said when I'd finished. "I'm so sorry, but I have to ask. What are you going to do about it?" "I don't know," I replied. Honestly. Confront him, I guess. Demand an explanation. Try to figure out if our marriage is salvageable. "Those are options," Carmen agreed carefully. "But before you do anything, I want you to consider something else. What do you want, Victoria? Not what's best for your marriage, not what's most convenient, not what causes the least disruption. What do you actually want for your life?" The question caught me off guard. I'd spent so many years considering what Brandon wanted, what our relationship needed, what would support his success, that I'd almost forgotten how to think about my own desires and ambitions. "I used to know," I said slowly. "I wanted to build something meaningful in sustainable fashion. I wanted to prove that environmental responsibility and beautiful design could coexist commercially. I wanted to make a difference." "Past tense," Carmen observed. "But those dreams don't have expiration dates, Vic. You're 38, not 88. You're talented, educated, passionate about your field. The only thing stopping you from pursuing those goals is the belief that you can't." "It's been so long since I've done any real design work," I protested. "The industry has changed, moved past me. I wouldn't even know where to start." "That's fear talking," Carmen replied firmly. "And fear lies. The fashion industry always needs authentic voices, especially in sustainability. Your environmental background, combined with your aesthetic sense, could be exactly what the market is missing." We talked for another hour, with Carmen gradually shifting the conversation from my marriage crisis to my dormant professional ambitions. She told me about sustainable fashion startups she'd seen in her investment work, about the growing market for environmentally conscious clothing, about the opportunities that existed for someone with the right vision and determination. "I'm not saying you should leave Brandon," she clarified. "That's a decision only you can make. But I am saying that you should remember who you were before you became his wife, and consider who you could become regardless of what happens with your marriage." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen holding my cold coffee cup, processing our conversation alongside the morning's devastating discovery. Carmen was right about one thing. I'd been thinking in reactive terms, focused on responding to Brandon's betrayal rather than considering what I wanted for my future. The afternoon stretched ahead of me, empty of the usual tasks that filled my days. Brandon wouldn't be home until late, giving me time to think without the pressure of maintaining normal appearances. I could confront him immediately, demand explanations and apologies, try to rebuild our relationship on new terms. Or I could use this time to understand what I truly wanted from my life, what kind of future I might create for myself. I walked through our house, really seeing it for perhaps the first time in years. Every room reflected my aesthetic choices, my eye for sustainable materials and beautiful design. I'd created a showcase home while telling myself it was just a hobby, just support for Brandon's career. But looking at it now, I could see real talent in the space planning, the color coordination, the integration of environmental consciousness, with visual appeal. In our bedroom closet, I found my college portfolio buried behind Brandon's off-season clothing. The leather portfolio case was dusty but intact, protecting the design sketches and project plans I'd created during my senior year. I carried it downstairs to the dining room table and opened it carefully, afraid of what I might find. The work was better than I'd remembered. My designs showed real innovation in sustainable materials and manufacturing processes, combined with an aesthetic sensibility that was both contemporary and timeless. The technical drawings were precise, the market analysis thoughtful, the business projections realistic. This had been the work of someone who understood both the creative and commercial aspects of fashion design. One project in particular caught my attention, a capsule collection focused on locally sourced materials and zero-waste construction techniques. I'd partnered with Oregon textile mills and hemp farmers to create a line that was both environmentally responsible and commercially viable. My professor had written, "Exceptional potential, pursue this concept," in red ink across the final page. I'd never pursued it. After graduation, I'd been so focused on supporting Brandon's career, so convinced that financial stability had to come first, that I'd never even tried to find investors or manufacturing partners for my ideas. The concepts had remained in this portfolio, gathering dust while I arranged flowers and organized dinner parties. Sitting at my dining room table, surrounded by evidence of my abandoned ambitions, I felt something shifting inside me. The pain of Brandon's betrayal was still there, sharp and present, but it was accompanied by something else. Anger at myself for allowing my dreams to atrophy, for accepting such a diminished version of my potential. My phone buzzed with a "I." Text from Brandon. "Investor meeting running long. We'll grab dinner with the team. Don't wait up. Love you." Standard message, the kind he'd sent hundreds of times during our marriage. But now I read it differently, wondering if the team included Natalie, if investor meeting was code for something else entirely. How many of his late nights had been fabrications? How many times had I wished him well on activities that were really opportunities to be with her? Instead of the usual supportive response, I typed back a simple, "Okay, see you tomorrow." No heart emoji, no encouraging words about his important work. Just acknowledgement that I'd received his message. I spent the evening redesigning pieces from my college collection, updating them with current trends and improved sustainable materials I'd learned about during my years of supporting Brandon's environmental development projects. My knowledge of green building materials translated surprisingly well to fashion applications: organic fibers, recycled components, innovative manufacturing processes that minimized waste and environmental impact. By midnight, I had rough sketches for an entire collection that combined my original aesthetic with current market demands and available sustainable technologies. The work felt like coming alive after years of sleepwalking, like remembering a language I'd once spoken fluently. Brandon came home after 1 a.m., moving quietly through the house to avoid waking me. I heard him in the bathroom, the familiar sounds of his nighttime routine, and felt a strange detachment from these domestic rhythms that had once comforted me. Tomorrow we would have to address what I'd discovered, confront the reality of his affair, and decide what to do about our marriage. But tonight, for the first time in years, I'd remembered who I'd been before I became Brandon's wife. I'd reconnected with the ambitious designer who'd believed she could change the fashion industry, who'd had the talent and vision to create something meaningful and profitable. The text message that had shattered my world that morning had also cracked open a door I'd closed long ago. Through that opening, I could glimpse possibilities I'd forgotten existed, a future I could create for myself regardless of what happened with Brandon and his affair. Natalie Kim might have thought she was winning by taking my husband, but she'd unknowingly given me something far more valuable: the motivation to reclaim the life I'd abandoned. Her careless error in sending that text had been the catalyst. I'd needed to remember that I was more than just Brandon's supportive wife, more than the woman who arranged flowers and organized charity events. I was Victoria Hayes, and I had my own dreams to pursue. Whether or not my marriage survived, whether or not Brandon chose me over his younger, wealthier, more accomplished mistress, I was going to build something extraordinary for myself. The foundation of that future was already taking shape in the sketches spread across my dining room table, in the renewed sense of purpose flowing through me like electricity. Brandon's betrayal had broken my heart, but it had also broken the chains that had kept me from pursuing my own ambitions. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations and painful decisions. But tonight, I was designing again, creating again, dreaming again. Tonight, I was remembering who I truly was. The confrontation came the next morning over coffee. in the same kitchen where I'd discovered his betrayal less than 24 hours earlier. Brandon sat at our breakfast bar, scrolling through emails with the casual efficiency that had always impressed me, completely unaware that his world was about to shift dramatically. "We need to talk," I said, setting my coffee cup down with deliberate care. The words hung in the morning air between us, heavy with implication. His eyes lifted from his phone, immediately alert to the gravity in my tone. "What's wrong, Vic? You look like you haven't slept." "I found your phone yesterday morning," I said simply. "I saw the messages from Natalie." The color drained from his face so completely that for a moment I thought he might faint. His phone slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the granite countertop we'd selected together 3 years ago. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. "Victoria, I can explain—" "Don't," I interrupted, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "Don't insult me with explanations or justifications. I know what I saw. The only question is, what happens next?" He stared at me, clearly struggling to process this version of his wife. Calm, direct, uncompromising. This wasn't the supportive, accommodating Victoria who had smoothed over every difficulty in his life for 12 years. This was someone he didn't recognize, and his confusion was evident. "How long?" I asked when he remained silent. 6 months, he admitted quietly. "It started during the Pearl District project planning. We were working late, and she understood the pressure I was under, the importance of landing this development deal." "Stop," I said firmly. "I don't want to hear about your justifications. 6 months of lying to me, 6 months of planning weekend getaways while I supported your career, 6 months of making me feel crazy for noticing changes in your behavior." His shoulders sagged as if the weight of his deception was finally becoming real to him. "I never meant for this to happen, Vic. I love you. I've always loved you." "No," I replied, the word cutting through his attempt at reconciliation. "You love the idea of me. You love having a supportive wife who makes your life easier, who asks for nothing and gives everything. But you don't love me enough to be faithful, to be honest, to consider my feelings when making decisions that affect both our lives." The conversation continued for another hour, circling through familiar territory of apologies, promises, and desperate attempts at negotiation. Brandon wanted to end things with Natalie, wanted to recommit to our marriage, wanted to pretend the last 6 months had been a momentary lapse in judgment rather than a systematic betrayal of everything we'd built together. But something fundamental had shifted in me during the night I'd spent redesigning my college portfolio. The woman who might have accepted his apologies, who might have tried to rebuild our relationship on his terms, no longer existed. In her place was someone who finally understood that staying in this marriage would require me to become even smaller, even more accommodating, even more willing to ignore my own needs. "I want a divorce," I said finally, the words emerging with a clarity that surprised us both. Brandon's face crumpled. "Vic, please, we can work through this. Marriage counseling, whatever you need, I'll do anything to save us." "There is no us anymore," I replied, gently but firmly. "There's you, pursuing what you want, regardless of the cost to anyone else. And there's me, finally ready to build a life that reflects my own values and ambitions." The divorce proceedings moved with brutal efficiency. Brandon, perhaps motivated by guilt or maybe by eagerness to start his new life with Natalie, didn't contest my requests for our shared assets. The house would be sold, proceeds split equally. Our savings accounts divided down the middle. I would keep my car, my personal belongings, and the portfolio of abandoned dreams I'd rediscovered in our closet. Oregon's no-fault divorce laws meant I didn't need to prove his infidelity or assign blame publicly. We could dissolve our marriage with administrative efficiency, reducing 12 years of shared history to a stack of legal documents and financial settlements. What the paperwork? couldn't capture was the strange sense of liberation I felt as each form was signed, each asset divided, each tie severed. I'd expected grief, devastation, the kind of emotional collapse that accompanies the end of everything familiar. Instead, I felt like someone waking up from a long, confusing dream. The house sold within 2 weeks, snapped up by a young couple who loved the sustainable design features I'd incorporated over the years. They praised my aesthetic choices, asked about the sources for various materials, and expressed amazement at the seamless integration of environmental consciousness with beautiful design. "You have incredible talent," the wife had said during their final walkthrough. "Have you ever considered interior design as a career? Portland needs more professionals who understand sustainable living." Standing in our empty living room, listening to strangers appreciate the space I'd created, I felt a spark of possibility that had been dormant for too long. Maybe Carmen had been right about my untapped potential. Maybe the skills I'd developed, while supporting Brandon's career, could become the foundation for my own success. With my share of the house proceeds and savings, I had enough money to live modestly for about 2 years while figuring out my next steps. Not wealthy, but not desperate either. Enough runway to take calculated risks, to invest in myself rather than someone else's dreams. I rented a 1-bedroom apartment in the Alberta Arts District, drawn to the neighborhood's creative energy and growing reputation as a center for sustainable small businesses. The space was tiny compared to our Beaverton house, but it felt like mine in a way that larger home never had. Every choice, from the vintage furniture I found at local thrift stores to the plants I arranged on the windowsills, reflected my authentic preferences rather than what would impress Brandon's business associates. My first order of business was updating my design portfolio with current market research and trend analysis. I spent hours in Powell's books, reading every fashion industry publication I could find, studying how the sustainable clothing market had evolved during my years away from the field. The growth was remarkable. What had been a niche market when I was in college was now a significant segment of the industry, driven by increasing consumer awareness of environmental issues and labor practices. Portland's position as a hub for environmentally conscious businesses gave me a unique advantage. The city was home to several companies specializing in organic textiles, recycled materials, and innovative manufacturing processes. Local consumers were increasingly interested in supporting brands that aligned with their environmental values, creating a ready market for the kind of products I'd envisioned in college. I reached out to Dr. Patricia Wong, who had been my favorite professor in college and was now running a sustainable business incubator at Portland State University. When I called her office, nervous about making contact after so many years, her response was immediately enthusiastic. "Victoria Hayes, I was wondering when you'd finally resurface in the fashion world. I've followed your domestic architecture work through social media, and I've always thought you were wasting your talents on interior design when you could be revolutionizing clothing." We met for coffee at a bustling cafe in the Pearl District, ironically just blocks from where Brandon was working on his sustainable development project with Natalie. Dr. Wong looked exactly as I remembered, silver hair in an elegant bob, wearing a beautifully tailored jacket that I suspected was her own design, radiating the kind of confidence that came from building something meaningful over decades. "Show me what you've been working on," she said immediately after our initial catching up. I opened my updated portfolio nervously, aware that these designs would be judged by someone whose opinion I deeply respected. Dr. Wong studied each page carefully, occasionally asking questions about material sourcing or manufacturing techniques, nodding with increasing enthusiasm as she reviewed my work. "This is exceptional," she said finally. "The technical knowledge you've gained about sustainable materials has elevated your design sensibility considerably. These pieces could absolutely compete in today's market." "I'm not sure I'd even know where to start," I admitted. "The industry seems so different from when I was studying it." "Different, yes, but also more open to exactly what you're proposing," she replied. The challenge isn't market acceptance, it's execution. Manufacturing, distribution, marketing, all the business infrastructure needed to turn great designs into profitable products. She leaned forward, her expression becoming more serious. I'm going to make you an offer, Victoria. The business incubator has a spot opening in our next cohort, 6 months of intensive mentorship, access to industry connections, shared workspace, and a small seed funding opportunity for the most promising ventures. Applications were due last month, but I can get you in if you're serious about this. The opportunity was more than I dared to hope for. Professional guidance, access to resources, a structured environment for turning my ideas into reality. But it also represented a commitment to a path I hadn't fully decided to pursue. A leap into uncertainty after years of careful stability. What would I need to provide? I asked. A business plan, financial projections, and a sample collection demonstrating market viability, Dr. Wong replied. Normally, I'd give applicants 3 months to prepare, but given your background and the quality of what I'm seeing here, I think you could have everything ready in 6 weeks if you're willing to work intensively. 6 weeks to develop a comprehensive business plan for a company that existed only in my imagination. 6 weeks to create sample garments that would prove my designs could work in the real world. 6 weeks to transform from Brandon's supportive ex-wife into a serious entrepreneur with a viable business proposition. I'll do it, I said, the words emerging before I'd fully processed the magnitude of what I was committing to. Dr. Wong smiled, with genuine warmth. I was hoping you'd say that. Welcome back to the fashion world, Victoria. It's been waiting for you. The next 6 weeks were unlike anything I'd experienced since college. I threw myself into business plan development with the focused intensity of someone who finally understood what they were working toward. My apartment became a design studio, with fabric samples, technical drawings, and financial projections, covering every available surface. I researched Oregon textile manufacturers, hemp farmers, and innovative recycling facilities that could supply the sustainable materials central to my vision. I analyzed competitors in the sustainable fashion space, identifying gaps in the market that my designs could fill. I developed pricing strategies, distribution channels, and marketing approaches that would position my brand effectively in Portland's conscious consumer market. The business plan that emerged was more sophisticated than anything I'd created. In college, informed by years of observing Brandon's project development process, and enhanced by my mature understanding of market dynamics and consumer behavior, I was building something that could actually work, not just in theory, but in the real world of profit margins and supply chain logistics. Creating the sample collection required skills I hadn't used in over a decade. I rented time on industrial, sewing machines at a local makerspace, teaching myself techniques I'd only read about in textbooks. My fingers remembered the rhythm of precise stitching, the satisfaction of watching fabric transform into finished garments under my guidance. Each piece in the collection told a story about sustainable fashion possibilities. A blazer constructed from hemp fiber and recycled wool that looked indistinguishable from traditional suiting but had a fraction of the environmental impact. A dress made from fabric woven from recycled plastic bottles, demonstrating how waste materials could be transformed into something beautiful and functional. A coat featuring innovative insulation created from reclaimed down and organic cotton, proving that environmental consciousness didn't require sacrificing performance or style. The technical challenges were significant, but solving them felt like the most engaging work I'd done in years. Every problem was a puzzle to be solved through research, experimentation, and creative thinking. Every successful solution was evidence that my ideas could work in practice, not just in imagination. Carmen flew up from San Francisco for the weekend before my incubator presentation, eager to see what I'd accomplished and offer feedback from her venture capital perspective. She arrived at my apartment to find me surrounded by sample garments, financial spreadsheets, and presentation materials that covered every horizontal surface. "Holy shit, Victoria," she said, examining the blazer I'd just finished. "This is beautiful. Really, genuinely beautiful. And you made this yourself?" "Every stitch," I replied proudly. "The fabric is from a mill in Hillsborough that specializes in hemp wool blends. The buttons are made from recycled ocean plastic. The lining is organic cotton from a farm in eastern Oregon." Carmen studied the garment with the analytical eye of someone who evaluated business propositions professionally. She checked the construction quality, examined the materials, tested the fit and movement. Her expression grew increasingly impressed as she conducted her inspection. "The quality is comparable to anything I'd find in high-end San Francisco boutiques," she said finally. "But the environmental story adds value that traditional brands can't match. You're not asking consumers to compromise, you're offering them something better." We spent the evening reviewing my business plan, with Carmen offering suggestions from her experience with successful startups. She helped me refine my financial projections, strengthen my market analysis, and develop more compelling language for describing my value proposition to potential investors. "You've built something real here," she said as we finished our review. "This isn't just a nice idea or a creative hobby. This is a viable business that could scale significantly if executed properly." The validation from someone whose judgment I trusted was almost overwhelming. For months, I'd been working in isolation, uncertain whether my ideas had merit beyond my own enthusiasm for them. Carmen's professional assessment confirmed that I'd created something with genuine commercial potential. "There's one more thing," Carmen said as she prepared to leave for her hotel. "My firm is launching a new fund focused specifically on sustainable consumer brands. We're looking for exactly this kind of opportunity, experienced founders with innovative approaches to environmental challenges. Would you be interested in pitching to us once you complete the incubator program?" The possibility of professional investment, of taking my company beyond the limitations of personal savings, added another layer of reality to what I was building. This wasn't just about personal fulfillment or proving something to myself. It was about creating a business that could have real impact in the world. "Absolutely," I replied. "I'd be honored to pitch to your fund." The night before my incubator presentation, I sat in my small apartment surrounded by the evidence of 6 weeks of intensive work. Sample garments hung on a makeshift rack near the window. My business plan was printed, bound, and ready for distribution. Presentation slides were loaded on my laptop, refined through multiple practice sessions. But more than the tangible artifacts of my work, I felt a fundamental shift in how I understood myself and my capabilities. The woman who had discovered her husband's affair 7 weeks ago had been devastated, lost, uncertain about her identity beyond her role as Brandon's supportive wife. The woman preparing to present her business plan tomorrow was confident, focused, and clear about her value and potential. I'd spent 12 years believing that my greatest contribution was supporting someone else's ambitions. Now I understood that my real talent lay in creating something entirely my own, something that reflected my values and vision rather than serving someone else's goals. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, but it had been thorough. I was no longer the woman who would accept betrayal in service of preserving a comfortable life. I was someone willing to take risks, to bet on my own abilities, to build something meaningful, even if it meant leaving everything familiar behind. Tomorrow's presentation would determine whether I'd be accepted into the incubator program, whether my business idea would receive professional validation and support. But regardless of the outcome, I'd already accomplished something more important. I'd remembered who I was when I wasn't defined by someone else's needs and expectations. Brandon's affair had shattered the life I'd thought I wanted. In the wreckage of that destruction, I'd discovered the life I actually needed to build. His betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been liberating, freeing me from a limiting narrative about my role and potential. As I prepared for bed in my small apartment, surrounded by the evidence of my renewed ambition, I felt grateful for Natalie's careless text message. Her mistake had given me the truth I needed to change. Course, to stop supporting someone else's dreams and start pursuing my own. She thought she was winning by taking my husband, but she'd actually given me something far more valuable, the motivation to reclaim my own life. The presentation tomorrow would be just the beginning. Win or lose, I was building something that belonged entirely to me, something that would exist because of my vision and effort, rather than in service of someone else's success. After years of making myself smaller to accommodate Brandon's ambitions, I was finally ready to discover just how large my own dreams could become. The presentation went better than I'd dared to hope. Standing before the panel of industry professionals, investors, and fellow entrepreneurs, I felt a confidence I hadn't experienced since college. My hands didn't shake as I displayed my sample garments. My voice remained steady as I walked through financial projections and market analysis. When the questions came, I answered them with the authority of someone who had lived and breathed this business plan for 6 weeks. Your technical knowledge of sustainable materials is impressive, commented Maria Santos, a venture capitalist who specialized in environmental startups. But what makes you think you can compete with established brands that have significant marketing budgets and distribution networks? Because they're retrofitting sustainability onto existing business models, I replied confidently. I'm building sustainability into the foundation of everything we do. Our supply chain, our manufacturing processes, our customer relationships, everything is designed around environmental responsibility from day one. That authenticity resonates with consumers who are tired of greenwashing. Dr. Wong smiled proudly from her seat at the panel table as I fielded questions about manufacturing partnerships, pricing strategies, and scalability plans. The months of research and preparation had paid off. I had thoughtful, well-researched answers for every challenge they raised. When they announced my acceptance into the incubator program 3 days later, along with a $25,000 seed grant to develop my first production run, I celebrated alone in my apartment with a bottle of wine and takeout from my favorite Vietnamese restaurant. The victory felt entirely mine in a way that none of Brandon's professional achievements ever had. The incubator workspace was located in a converted warehouse in the Central East Side Industrial District, shared by 12 companies working on everything from sustainable packaging to renewable energy storage. My assigned desk was small, but it came with access to professional mentors, industry connections, and most importantly, a community of entrepreneurs who understood the unique challenges of building something from nothing. Ryan Thompson occupied the desk directly across from mine. His company, Ecologistics, was developing software to optimize supply chain efficiency for sustainable product manufacturers. He was tall, with prematurely gray hair and laugh lines that suggested someone who found genuine joy in problem solving. His background was in environmental engineering, but he'd taught himself programming to build the tools he wished existed for his previous consulting work. Sustainable fashion, he said on my first day, studying the mood board I'd pinned to my cubicle wall. That's a tough market. Lots of competition, complex supply chains, fickle consumer preferences. Thanks for the encouragement, I replied dryly, but his observation made me curious rather than defensive. What makes you think it's tougher than optimizing shipping routes for environmentally conscious manufacturers? Touché, he laughed. I guess we're all choosing hard problems to solve. At least your products are beautiful. Nobody gets excited about logistics software. That conversation became the first of many as we worked late into the evenings, troubleshooting challenges and celebrating small victories. Ryan had an analytical mind that complemented my creative approach to problem solving. When I struggled with production scheduling, he helped me build spreadsheets that tracked material flows and manufacturing timelines. When he needed to understand his potential customers' pain points, I shared insights from my own supply chain research. The friendship that developed was unlike anything I'd experienced during my marriage. Ryan was interested in my ideas for their own merit, not because they reflected well on him or supported his goals. He challenged my assumptions, offered alternative perspectives, and celebrated my successes without trying to claim credit for them. The contrast with Brandon's self-centered approach to our relationship was striking. "You realize you're building something revolutionary here," Ryan said one evening, as we reviewed my latest prototype designs. "These aren't just clothes that happen to be sustainable. You're proving that environmental responsibility can enhance rather than compromise aesthetic appeal." "That's always been the goal," I replied, adjusting the drape on a dress made from fabric woven with recycled fibers. "Consumers shouldn't have to choose between looking good and doing good." "Have you thought about the B Corp certification process?" he asked. "It might give you additional credibility with conscious consumers and impact investors." I hadn't considered B Corp certification, but Ryan's suggestion opened up new possibilities for positioning my brand in the sustainable business community. The certification process would require documenting our environmental and social impact, but it would also provide third-party validation of our values and practices. 3 months into the incubator program, I received an unexpected call from Marcus Sterling, Brandon's former boss at Sterling & Associates. The real estate development firm was expanding their sustainability initiatives and wanted to explore incorporating environmentally conscious design elements into their marketing materials and client presentations. "We're looking for local partners who understand both aesthetic appeal and environmental impact," Marcus explained during our phone conversation. "Your name came up as someone with expertise in sustainable design." The irony wasn't lost on me that Brandon's former employer was now approaching me as an independent professional rather than as an executive's supportive wife. Marcus clearly didn't know about my divorce or the circumstances surrounding it. To him, I was simply Victoria Hayes, emerging sustainable design expert. "I'd be interested in exploring a partnership," I replied carefully. "What kind of collaboration did you have in mind?" We scheduled a meeting for the following week at Sterling's downtown offices. As I prepared for the meeting, I couldn't help but think about Brandon and Natalie, who were presumably still working together on the Pearl District project. The building where I'd be pitching my services was the same one where my ex-husband spent his days with the woman he'd left me for. But instead of anxiety or pain, I felt a strange sense of completion. I was returning to that building as my own person, with my own business, my own expertise to offer. Whatever happened during the meeting, I would be there as Victoria Hayes, entrepreneur, not as someone's supportive spouse. The Sterling & Associates offices occupied 3 floors of a sleek downtown tower with floor-to-ceiling windows offering spectacular views of the Willamette River and Mount Hood. The reception area featured sustainable design elements that I recognized from my research: reclaimed wood reception desk, living wall of air-purifying plants, furniture made from recycled materials. Marcus Sterling greeted me personally, which I took as a positive sign. He was older than I'd expected, probably in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of expensive suit that suggested success and authority. His manner was professional but warm, the approach of someone genuinely interested in what I had to offer. "Ms. Hayes, thank you for coming in. I've heard impressive things about your work from several sources in Portland's sustainability community." He led me to a conference room where 2 other Sterling executives were waiting: the marketing director and the head of sustainable development projects. I recognized the marketing director as someone I'd met briefly at company events during my marriage, but she showed no sign of remembering me as Brandon's ex-wife. "We're at an interesting inflection point," Marcus began as I set up my presentation materials. "Our clients are increasingly interested in sustainability, but they also want their projects to be visually compelling and marketable. We need to find ways to tell better stories about environmental responsibility without sacrificing aesthetic appeal." I spent the next hour walking them through my approach to sustainable design, showing examples of how environmental consciousness could enhance rather than compromise visual appeal. I presented case studies from my clothing prototypes, demonstrating how sustainable materials and processes could create products that were both beautiful and responsible. "This is exactly what we're looking for," the marketing director said as I concluded my presentation. "Your ability to articulate the aesthetic benefits of sustainable choices could be incredibly valuable for our client communications." "We'd like to start with a pilot project," Marcus added. "Our Pearl District development is entering the final marketing phase. We want to create presentation materials that showcase the environmental features without making potential buyers feel like they're sacrificing luxury or style for sustainability." The Pearl District project, Brandon and Natalie's flagship development. The irony was almost too perfect. I would be helping to market the very project that had brought them together, using skills I'd developed after their affair destroyed my marriage. "I'd be very interested in working on that project," I said, maintaining my professional composure despite the cosmic humor of the situation. We negotiated terms over the following week, ultimately agreeing on a consulting contract that would pay more than I'd earned in any previous year. The project would involve creating visual presentations, written materials, and consulting on sustainable design elements that would appeal to environmentally conscious luxury buyers. My first task was reviewing the project's environmental features and developing messaging that would resonate with the target market. This required coordinating with the development team, which I assumed would include Brandon and Natalie, though Marcus hadn't mentioned their involvement specifically. "You'll be working primarily with our sustainability coordinator and marketing team," Marcus had said during our contract discussion. "The project managers have already completed their phase of the development." I wondered if this meant Brandon and Natalie had moved on to other projects, or if Marcus was carefully managing my involvement to avoid potential conflicts. Either way, I was grateful not to have to navigate the awkwardness of working directly with my ex-husband and his new partner. The Sterling project became a showcase for everything I'd learned about communicating sustainable design principles to mainstream consumers. I developed presentation materials that made environmental responsibility feel luxurious rather than sacrificial, showing how sustainable features enhanced rather than compromised the living experience. The success of the Sterling collaboration led to other consulting opportunities as word spread through Portland's development community about my expertise. I found myself working with architects, interior designers, and marketing firms who needed someone who understood both the technical aspects of sustainable design and the aesthetic sensibilities of upscale consumers. Each project added to my portfolio and reputation while providing income that supported my clothing company's development. I was building two complementary businesses, sustainable fashion and design consulting, that reinforced each other's credibility and market position. Carmen called regularly from San Francisco, tracking my progress and offering strategic advice from her venture capital perspective. During one of our conversations, she shared news that made my success feel even more significant. "I've been hearing interesting things about your consulting work," she said. "Several developers we've invested in have mentioned your name as someone who really understands how to market sustainability effectively." "It's been rewarding work," I replied. "There's real demand for authentic environmental messaging that doesn't feel preachy or compromise-focused. That's exactly why my fund is so interested in your clothing company," Carmen continued. "You've proven you can build a business around sophisticated environmental messaging. The consulting work is essentially market validation for your fashion brand's approach." She was right. The consulting projects had taught me invaluable lessons about communicating with environmentally conscious consumers, lessons that would directly benefit my clothing company's marketing and brand positioning. 6 months into the incubator program, I was ready to launch my first official collection. The months of prototype development, market research, and business building had resulted in 12 pieces that represented everything I'd learned about sustainable fashion design. Each garment told a story about environmental innovation while meeting the highest standards for quality, fit, and aesthetic appeal. I decided to launch with a trunk show at a boutique in the Alberta Arts District, the the same neighborhood where I'd rented my apartment after the divorce. The event would be small, intimate, focused on building relationships with early customers rather than generating massive sales volume. Ryan helped me set up the presentation space, arranging the garments to maximize their visual impact while telling the story of each piece's sustainable features. His attention to detail and genuine enthusiasm for my work had become invaluable support as my business grew. "You should be proud of what you've built," he said, as we made final adjustments to the display. "This collection is museum-quality work." "It feels surreal," I admitted. 2 years ago, I was arranging flowers for Brandon's business dinners. Now, I'm launching my own fashion line. 2 years ago, you were supporting someone else's dreams, Ryan corrected gently. Now you're pursuing your own. The difference is everything. The trunk show attracted 43 people, far more than I'd expected for a new designer's debut event. Dr. Wong attended, along with several incubator program colleagues and Portland fashion industry professionals I'd met through networking events. Carmen flew up from San Francisco specifically for the launch, bringing 2 other venture capitalists who were interested in sustainable fashion investments. But the most unexpected guest was a representative from Nordstrom's sustainability initiative, who had heard about my work through industry connections and wanted to see my collection firsthand. She spent significant time examining each piece, asking detailed questions about materials, manufacturing processes, and scalability potential. "This is exactly what we're looking for," she told me as the event wound down. "Products that prove sustainability doesn't require compromise. Would you be interested in discussing a potential retail partnership? A Nordstrom partnership would transform my small fashion company into a legitimate brand with access to major market distribution." It was an opportunity I hadn't dared to imagine when I'd started sketching designs in my apartment 18 months earlier. "I'd be very interested in exploring that possibility," I replied, working to keep my excitement from overwhelming my professional demeanor. As guests gradually departed, I found myself alone with Ryan, surrounded by the evidence of the evening's success. Order forms filled with customer information, business cards from potential partners, notes scribbled during conversations about future opportunities. "This is just the beginning," Ryan said, helping me pack up the remaining display materials. "You've built something special here, Victoria. Something that's going to change how people think about sustainable fashion." Looking around at the remnants of my successful launch event, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with external validation. I'd created something meaningful, something that reflected my values and vision while meeting real market demands. The business I was building belonged entirely to me, existing because of my ideas and effort rather than in service of someone else's goals. The journey from devastated wife to successful entrepreneur hadn't been linear or easy, but it had been authentic. Every challenge I'd overcome, every skill I'd developed, every connection I'd made had contributed to this moment of recognition and possibility. Natalie's careless text message had shattered one version of my life, but it had also cleared the ground for building something far better. Brandon's betrayal had been painful, but it had also been liberating, freeing me from a limiting narrative about my role and potential. As Ryan and I loaded the car with my collection and display materials, I realized that the evening represented more than a successful product launch. It was confirmation that I could build something significant entirely, on my own terms, something that honored my creativity and values while creating genuine value for others. The woman who had discovered her husband's affair through an accidental text message was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own worth and capability. I was no longer someone who needed to be chosen or validated by others. I was someone who could create her own opportunities and define her own success. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and decisions as I navigated the Nordstrom partnership opportunity and continued building my business. But tonight, surrounded by the evidence of what I'd accomplished, I felt completely confident in my ability to handle whatever came next. I was Victoria Hayes, founder and CEO of a growing sustainable fashion company, and I was just getting started. 18 months after my successful launch, Green Thread Studios had grown beyond my wildest projections. The Nordstrom partnership had opened doors to other major retailers, and my sustainable fashion line was now carried in boutiques across the Pacific Northwest. Carmen's venture capital fund had led a Series A investment round that valued my company at $12 million, providing the capital needed for significant expansion. I'd moved my operations from the shared incubator space to a renovated warehouse in the Mississippi district, where 32 employees now worked on everything from design development to customer service. The space reflected our brand's values: reclaimed, wood floors, energy-efficient lighting, living walls that purified the air while creating a beautiful work environment. My personal life had evolved alongside the business success. The small apartment in Alberta had been replaced by a stunning craftsman home in the Forest Grove Hills, with panoramic views of the Tualatin Valley and enough space for the art studio I'd always dreamed of having. The house was entirely mine, purchased with profits from my own company, decorated according to my authentic preferences rather than anyone else's expectations. Ryan and I had been dating for 8 months, our relationship growing naturally from professional collaboration to genuine partnership. He'd sold his logistics company to a larger tech firm and now served as my chief operating officer, bringing his analytical skills and environmental expertise to Green Thread's expansion. Unlike my marriage to Brandon, this relationship was built on mutual respect and shared values rather than sacrifice and accommodation. The Sustainability Conference in Austin wants you as their keynote speaker, Ryan mentioned over breakfast in my sunny kitchen, scrolling through the latest speaking requests on his tablet. They're expecting over 3,000 attendees from across the fashion industry. That's incredible, I replied, still adjusting to the reality that my opinions on sustainable fashion were now sought after by major industry events. 2 years ago, I was worried about whether anyone would attend my trunk show. 2 years ago, you were brilliant and undervalued, Ryan corrected with the directness I'd come to appreciate. Now you're brilliant and properly recognized for it. The conference invitation was particularly meaningful because it represented my emergence as a thought leader in sustainable fashion rather than just a successful business owner. I'd been invited to share insights about building authentic environmental brands, scaling sustainable manufacturing, and changing consumer behavior around conscious consumption. Preparing for the keynote speech required reflecting on the journey that had brought me from devastated divorcee to industry leader. The story I would tell wasn't really about business strategy or sustainable materials. It was about the transformation that becomes possible when someone stops accepting limitation and starts pursuing authentic potential. 3 days before my departure for Austin, I received an unexpected phone call that would provide the perfect conclusion to this chapter of my story. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was unmistakably familiar. "Victoria, this is Brandon. I hope you don't mind me calling, but I got your number from Marcus Sterling. I was hoping we could talk." The sound of my ex-husband's voice after more than 2 years of silence created an odd mix of curiosity and indifference. The pain and anger that had once dominated my feelings about him had been replaced by something closer to archaeological interest, recognition of someone from my past, rather than emotional investment in their current circumstances. "What can I do for you, Brandon?" I asked, my tone professionally courteous. "I've been following your success through industry publications," he said, his voice carrying notes of something that might have been regret or admiration. "Green Thread Studios is everywhere in sustainable business circles. Congratulations on building something so impressive." "Thank you," I replied, waiting for him to reveal the actual purpose of his call. "I'm sure you heard about what happened with Sterling and Associates," he continued, his voice becoming more strained. "The Pearl District project fell through when the environmental impact studies revealed some serious soil contamination issues. The company is restructuring, and my position was eliminated as part of the downsizing. I had heard rumors about Sterling's financial difficulties through my consulting network, but I hadn't known the specifics about Brandon's employment situation. The irony wasn't lost on me that the sustainable development project he'd been so excited about had ultimately failed due to environmental problems. "I'm sorry to hear about your job," I said genuinely. "That must be difficult." "The whole industry has been challenging lately," Brandon admitted. "Sustainable development requirements have become much more stringent, and frankly, I don't have the technical expertise that companies are looking for now. Everything is moving toward the kind of environmental specialization that you've mastered." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Brandon gradually revealing that his relationship with Natalie had ended badly when her father's company had been implicated in some questionable development practices. He was currently unemployed, living in a studio apartment, and struggling to find new opportunities in a field that had moved beyond his expertise. "I know this might sound presumptuous," he said finally, "but I was wondering if Green Thread might have any opportunities for someone with my background. I've learned a lot about sustainable business practices, and I'd be willing to start in any capacity." The request was so audacious that I had to pause for a moment to process it. My ex-husband, who had left me for a younger woman with better connections, was now asking me for employment at the company I'd built from the ashes of our failed marriage. "I appreciate your interest in Green Thread," I replied carefully, "but I don't think we're a good fit for your skill set. Our team requires deep expertise in sustainable materials and environmental impact assessment, areas where you don't have significant experience." "I could learn," Brandon said, desperation creeping into his voice. "I've always been good at adapting to new industries, and my business development background could be valuable for expansion planning." "I'm sure you could learn," I agreed diplomatically, "but we need people who are already experts in these areas. I'd suggest looking into sustainability certification programs that could help you transition your existing skills into environmental consulting." The conversation ended with polite pleasantries, but its real significance had nothing to do with Brandon's employment prospects. Hearing him struggle with the very changes I'd embraced, seeing him diminished by the same forces that had empowered me, provided a perfect illustration of how completely our roles had reversed. 2 years ago, he had been the successful one with valuable connections and growing influence, while I was the supportive spouse with untapped potential. Now I was the industry leader with expertise and opportunities, while he was the one scrambling to find relevance in a changing market. But instead of satisfaction or vindication, I felt something closer to gratitude. Brandon's betrayal had forced me to confront my own limitations and pursue my authentic ambitions. His affair with Natalie had shattered the comfortable prison of our marriage, liberating me to discover what I could accomplish when I stopped diminishing myself to accommodate someone else's ego. That evening, I shared the conversation with Ryan over dinner at our favorite restaurant in Northwest Portland. His reaction was characteristically direct and insightful. "He called because he finally understands what he lost," Ryan observed, cutting into his sustainably sourced salmon. "Not just you as a wife, but you as a person with capabilities he never recognized or valued." "Maybe," I replied, "but I think it's more about him realizing that the world has moved toward exactly the kind of expertise I've developed. He's not asking for me back. He's asking to benefit from the success I've built without him." "Either way," Ryan said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "His desperation is proof of how far you've come. The woman he left couldn't have built what you've created." Ryan was right. The woman Brandon had been married to, supportive, accommodating, willing to postpone her own dreams indefinitely, couldn't have built Green Thread Studios. She lacked the confidence, the determination, and most importantly, the clarity about her own worth that had driven my success. My transformation hadn't happened overnight, but it had been complete. I was no longer someone who measured her value by others' approval or defined her potential by others' limitations. I had become someone who created her own opportunities, set her own standards, and built her own version of success. The Austin keynote speech 3 days later provided the perfect platform for sharing this realization with a broader audience. Standing before 3,000 fashion industry professionals, I told the story of Green Thread Studios not as a business case study, but as an example of what becomes possible when someone stops accepting limitation and starts pursuing authentic potential. Sustainable fashion isn't just about environmental responsibility, I concluded my speech. It's about building businesses that reflect our authentic values rather than compromising our principles for short-term convenience. It's about proving that doing good and doing well aren't mutually exclusive, they're mutually reinforcing. The standing ovation that followed was gratifying, but the real validation came from the conversations afterward. Dozens of entrepreneurs, designers, and industry leaders approached me with their own stories of transformation, sharing how they'd found the courage to pursue their authentic visions rather than accepting others' limitations. Flying home to Portland that evening, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from Brandon's supportive wife to keynote speaker at major industry conferences. Natalie's accidental text message had been the catalyst, but the real transformation had come from my decision to stop accepting limitation and start pursuing possibility. 6 months later, I stood in Natalie Kim's kitchen, watching her process, the business card that proved how completely our positions had reversed. She had texted Brandon by mistake, revealing their affair and inadvertently handing me the motivation I needed to reclaim my life. Now she was learning that the woman she'd helped to betray had built something far more impressive than anything Brandon could offer. "Your guest cottage has similar finishes?" Natalie repeated, her voice barely above a whisper as she processed the implications of my casual comment about her home's size. "The main house overlooks the Tualatin Valley," I replied with serene confidence. "Ryan and I designed it specifically for entertaining and creative work. You should come by sometime. I think you'd appreciate the sustainable materials we use throughout." The invitation was genuine rather than mocking. I held no animosity toward Natalie, no desire for revenge or humiliation. Her affair with Brandon had been the catalyst for discovering my own potential, for building something meaningful and authentic, rather than continuing to diminish myself in service of someone else's ambitions. She had thought she was winning by taking my husband, but she had actually given me the greatest gift possible, the motivation to stop accepting limitation and start pursuing my authentic potential. Her careless error had been the best mistake she'd ever made, though neither of us had understood it at the time. As I prepared to leave her kitchen, returning to the life I'd built entirely on my own terms, I felt only gratitude for the chain of events that had brought me to this moment. Brandon's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been liberating. Natalie's text message had shattered my world, but it had also cleared the ground for building something far better. The woman who had discovered her husband's affair through an accidental text was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own worth and capability. I was Victoria Hayes, successful entrepreneur and industry leader, and I had Natalie's mistake to thank for making it all possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.